to implement the measures as pronounced by the President. Minister Zolimkhize.
Thank you very much, colleagues, members of the media. As we start, I just want to refer back to yesterday. The President issued a statement in his in his address to the nation, where he announced a lockdown, and we are here firstly to thank the President for his courageous and decisive leadership, and the National Coronavirus Command Council. We thank them for all the guidance and support in the fight against the coronavirus. We are aware that the virus has actually increased in the whole world. The number has really gone much higher than we actually initially anticipated. So in our case, we have been observing that the numbers of people who are affected worldwide has gone up to 382,000, which is much, much higher than what had alarmed the world when the problem was in China, and that of late, the countries that have gone up in their numbers have basically become Italy at 63,000 with more fatalities than were recorded in China. USA has also gone up to 46,000, Spain at 35,000, Germany at 29,000, and Spain has got 2,300 fatalities, and Iran at 23,000 with 1.8 fatalities, with France at 19,000. Korea, which was the second highest at some point, has actually stayed at about 9,000 with 120 fatalities. And Switzerland and UK are actually nearby those. This basically indicates the fact that the outbreak, as has been referred to as a pandemic, is actually changing, and it must obviously be issues that relate to the response of each nation and various other conditions, probably environmental, social, behavioral, or cultural issues, and various other health-related, factors that must be an issue at this level. So the last time when we spoke, I referred to us going into an area of hard combat, basically saying that all South Africans need to see themselves as part of this battle, as soldiers, and what we need to do at the level at which we are is to help guide everyone to say what role do we see each one of us playing in the fight against this virus. If we were to borrow the military terminology, once the commander-in-chief has spoken, all the field commanders must now go out and outline the battle plan. And these are the ones you have here, who are going to be indicating various aspects of the battle plan so that all South Africans have a sense as to what role they're going to be playing, but also what other factors have to be taken into account in this particular battle. Now, the way we're looking at it, there are a number of areas that we need to look at. So in terms of our strategy we said has to be about flattening the curve. In other words, we allow the infection to be drawn out in such a way that we get as few people infected as possible so that it does not grow so rampantly as to overwhelm our health services. In that way, we have to behave or take certain decisions that will make it easier for us to manage it and more difficult for it to spread. And this means that there are a number of areas that we must focus on. The first of those is the area wherein we have individuals who are tested, who are positive, that must be taken for treatment. And when they get treatment, they get isolated so that we can at least know that not only are they going to get better, but also they're not going to be infecting other people. It's easier to deal with that because our health services, health workers are well trained to deal with that. The second aspect is to those who were in contact with them, we call them direct contacts. Those are the ones that we will actually trace after that and make sure that when we find them, we test them, and those who need to be quarantined will be quarantined so that we can ensure that we know if they're developing the virus within that period, and at the same time, we keep them somewhere in a way that they don't need to spread the virus to the next individuals, as it were. The third area is we have noticed that one of the major risky areas is infection that would have come from specifically affected countries. I've mentioned them already, and therefore people who would have been in those countries would inadvertently carry the infection unknowingly, and before they know it, it would have spread to other people. And so this means, therefore, we had to limit the numbers of people who could have come from the areas where they could be infected, and this, therefore, explains what it means to restrict movement at our boundaries, at our borders, mainly in the airports and at sea, therefore seeking out people who could come from areas that could be risky, and therefore we have therefore, President has spoken about the limitation of movement of aircrafts and cruises that come from those particular areas. This is a very important area because if we count on the numbers, we have seen that 75% to date of those who are positive actually have got a history of travel to these particular countries. And another percentage of those that are outside that, within that 25%, are people who have got a direct link to those who would have come or who have been traveling to those particular countries. So we believe that limiting that is going to help us to reduce the numbers of people who are infected. Thereafter, we will then be dealing with what we call internal transmission. Internal transmission basically means that you could either have people who are linked to those who were abroad in the particular countries, but they themselves were not abroad. So a family, we've already got families where the father or the mother or both were abroad, they came back, now the children are positive. So that is internal transmission of people who have not themselves had a history of travel. Then linked to that is what WHO refers to as sporadic cases. These are instances where someone is found to be positive, but they cannot point out at anyone that they would say they know for a fact was abroad, which means that the infection is becoming more endemic in the community, and therefore you can pick it up somewhere without it being linked to someone who has come from abroad. So those are the various fronts on which we want to deal with this particular issue. Now, I've outlined how we deal with each one of them, but the last one is actually the basis on which you have a lockdown recommended, because what it basically says is that last week the President had asked that we must reduce large meetings, and so we've been quite grateful for the churches, church leaders and religious leaders for saying they would cancel the religious gatherings, and that was a huge act of patriotism on the side of the religious leaders who decided that despite the fact that they passionately believe in the services that are conducted in churches, in mosques, and synagogues, but they then said, would like people to pray from their homes and turn their homes into synagogues, into mosques, into churches. That actually helps a lot because there are instances, and I'm going to go into one of those, where those gatherings can actually give huge amounts. I did make a mention in the past of a church in South Korea, which was responsible for about 59–60% of the spread of the infection in that country. And therefore, it's important for us to acknowledge the very, very huge contribution that has been made by the religious leaders by just agreeing that they will reduce church services so that they no more than 100 people, and that they will actually cancel the Good Friday and Easter church gatherings. That takes care of a huge amount because people would have moved from the whole of SADC, they would have moved from different parts of the country, as it were. That left then for us one huge area of a huge movement of people, and that was the taxis and the trains, where the numbers of people per day, people who travel in South Africa, are 16 million. And that number, that is exclusive of those who travel in their own cars. I'm just talking about public transport, largely taxis, 16 million people every day, and where if the infection were to be spreading, it could easily spread from one person to a large number of people who cannot be traced as contacts because they don't know each other. And by the time the infection is detected, a number of people could have been exposed. So that is the courage that the president's leadership has been able to give to us, that we allow that space for freezing of movement. We're basically trying to freeze the movement of the virus from one person to the other through the congestion. That's what the lockdown is all about. And I'd like us to understand this as an act of really a very strong measure to try and get all of us to cut this virus and cut it down at the beginning of its trail. This issue, therefore, becomes an important contribution to managing this. But I want to also just mention one aspect, that our people need to understand that whilst there are lots of issues around the lockdown, there are a few things that we've had to consider. First one is that the lockdown must not give us a problem of a shortage of food supplies, and the president has spoken about that, and my colleagues will deal with that. Also, they also have to deal with the protection of income. My colleagues have to deal with that. Those are very critical issues which are important in the management of any health condition so far as we're concerned. So all of these issues that they'll be raising are about supporting the health of our nation. They are all about ensuring that we keep our people in reasonably good health whilst we prevent the spread of the infection. There is one caveat, though, which I want to mention here, and that is the fact that the lockdown helps us to reduce large numbers of people moving, wherein the infection flow would actually be unmanageable. However, it does not mean that lockdown on its own solves the problem. We still need precautions. We need precautions because in the experience of China, the 75% of the spread actually happened within family settings. In other words, if there is someone who's positive in a family setting, then the family tends to be affected. That goes for smaller groups of people, and that becomes an important issue to be still considerate about. So the hygiene of blocking your nose and mouth when you cough, watching a distance between someone who's coughing or sneezing, is still very, very important. The issue of washing hands and hygiene is still very, very important. So people mustn't think, therefore, that, well, the president has declared a lockdown, we're now safe. No. This creates an environment, a condition under which we can all fight against the spread of the infection. So it's one aspect, but our aspect remains important because between people to people, the spread will happen even if there's a lockdown. But once we stop large movement of people, we've reduced the risk significantly. Now the people must now reduce the risk between themselves. That is the point that I'd like to make as we move on. I'm mentioning these points just to put in context what, when we said this is a combat zone and every one of us is a force on the ground, we need to then know that we still have a role to play individually in stopping the spread of the infection. Yes, the terrain might be favoring us in this case, but we may lose the battle if we lose simple personal contributions to this issue. So I want to then say, I indicated that 554 new cases have been recorded overnight, and this is the results from as of 2300 last night. We have 5 confirmed conversions where people have turned negative who were positive in the original list. Most of our people are in a good condition. Many of them are no longer symptomatic, and some of them are still being looked after at home. We have record of 2 patients who are in the ICU in private hospitals, and then there is no death at this point. And I think it's important for us to be able to give you a sense of where things are. But the rate at which the numbers are increasing, we expect that the numbers will still increase. I hate to give you guessworks, but we still expect the numbers to increase for the next week. But once our whole program tightens up strongly, and we expect that probably if there should be a change, we should probably start seeing it not next week, but probably towards the end of the 2nd week or maybe the 3rd week. It's taken Korea 4 weeks to actually start seeing the inflection of the curve. So we must say that we will expect that in the next week or 2, these numbers, by the time we see the inflection, they would have probably gone 3 or 4 times or so. That's just a one man's guess. It's not even a projection. I'm just saying that the numbers, we mustn't be shocked when we see them increase. But these measures, if we all work together, must turn the curve around. But it won't happen tomorrow. It won't happen next week. If there's any change, it should probably take us a couple of weeks before we can see a turnaround. So the theory and the thinking is that if we, for example, are able to contain everyone who has a potential of passing the infection, we contain them there. On an average, 14 days lapses before you can actually finish off the viral shedding. So it should be possible to allow as many people to shed the virus without spreading to other people. That is the approach to this matter. And I want to explain that just so that we all understand what is the thinking behind it and what are the risks that we must watch out for as the people. Gauteng has got the highest numbers, now sitting at 302. We've actually geomapped them all. The large number of them are in Johannesburg. A few are in Ekurhuleni and it's in Tshwane and some of the other areas. Western Cape has gone to 113, increased by 14 yesterday. And KwaZulu-Natal, the 3rd one, is at 80, which is an increase of 20. But that's where we first got the first patient, and there is where the first 4 patients have shown recovery and conversion to negative status. Free State is at 18, an increase of 5. This is the one I want us to concentrate on. Here we had a church that had about 300 people, and it was over 4 days. And in this case, the church had 5 people who were visitors from abroad, all of whom, well, it had about 7 who came from outside, but 5 of them were found to be positive, and they're actually still in the Free State. 1 has been taken to hospital, the others are still in quarantine. That's where we believe that the church got the infected from, and we have tracked now all those contacts, and we've found that amongst them, those are the ones that tend to be positive. We've found them to be positive, as it were. I'll probably come back to that issue a little bit later. Northwest has now a total of 5 cases, and there's an increase of 1. Mpumalanga remains at 9, Limpopo at 4, and Northern Cape has got 2. With the one on Northern Cape, one One has got a history of travel, but the other one actually comes from the church, to the extent that when we tested the person, they were still in the Free State. They had not even reached home, and so we are able to indicate that. Eastern Cape remains at 2. Those are travelers who came from outside the country who are still staying in that area. Then you will notice that there are some cases when we give you the statement who are unallocated per province. The problem with those is the numbers are increasing, and therefore we are starting to find missing information on the forms when we are trying to track where this person had come from. It means that once we release to you the information, it will say unallocated. But when we get the information, we'll clean it up later. It will be long after your press briefing has gone. As of 23 March 2020, South Africa had conducted 12,815 tests of COVID-19. 10,000 of these were done in the private laboratories, and 2,000 have been done by the public laboratories. South Africans would have noticed that as the number of confirmed cases increased, some cases were unallocated on age and gender. This is because now the NICD is not the only one that's got the responsibility of analyzing data from each laboratory. Each laboratory supplies information. Now NICD has to go back and try and decipher the details of this information. But it has also found itself searching for missing information, and therefore you've got a confirmed case, but the information is not complete. This has created an administrative burden, and if it's not rectified, it's going to hamper our efforts to be immediately in contact with the patients who have tested positive and to determine whether they require hospitalization or to be treated in self-quarantine, or even to trace all the individuals that have been in direct contact with them. This is the only way we can flatten the curve, by making sure that we use information as soon as possible. We must know every individual that has been exposed, and they must be immediately screened, and those who require testing must be tested without delay while they remain in self-quarantine. If those contacts test positive, we must further identify their contacts, because they also become the potential positive cases. You'll notice that I keep repeating this because I think it's very important for people to understand exactly how we're dealing with this thing. Simply put, this is a vicious cycle, and without quickly fully identifying confirmed cases and their contacts, the spread of the virus will keep rising. This is therefore the call for us to take stringent measures to ensure that we have all the information that is required. And therefore, at this stage, I want to make an announcement to all clinicians and to pathology laboratories. The National Health Act regulations relating to the surveillance and control of notifiable medical conditions, which were promulgated in 2017 December, impose a legal obligation on you to adhere to specific reporting standards. In this regard, I'll refer them to Regulation 8, 9, 10, and 13. Therefore, it is compulsory that every clinician and pathology laboratory, both in private and public, must ensure that any patient who presents themselves for a COVID-19 test must provide full details in the form. This must include the following basic information: patient's full names, ID numbers, physical address, mobile numbers, and alternative contact number. These details are important for the treatment of the patient and prevention of the spread to other people. That's why we're insisting on it. It's in the regulation, and to avoid any confusion, there is a publicly available form that all clinicians and pathologists should be aware of. It is called the Notifiable Medical Conditions in a Case Notification Form. They have to fill that in because this is a notifiable disease. Regulation 20 states that any person who fails to comply with the provisions of these regulations is guilty of an offense and can be imprisoned for up to 10 years. And I now think it's important that when we take all these steps now, we need to deal with some of the basics. These unallocated names and patients mean that we are unable to reach the next one who's at risk. Therefore, everyone needs to understand that it's not a nicety to fill the form. It's an obligation by law, and we'll be able now to track back and check who is actually not complying with the law. I must emphasize that we acknowledge the dedication and the commitment and sacrifice that clinicians and pathologists and all health workers have shown since the outbreak. However, we're also mindful that in the course of their duty, they must still ensure compliance even when under pressure. This remains key to us in flattening the curve. These issues for us are very important, and I do accept that most of the health workers are working under pressure, but that part of patient care now and also part of preventing the spread means that we must have all the information, then we can actually get the other teams to do their job. To all South Africans, please help us to protect you and your loved one. We need you to play your part. Government has put all these measures in place, but we need commitment of citizens to comply with this. Our position is now clear. We request that you comply. If there is resistance, we therefore need to enforce the resistance through the law. As already mentioned above, for us to minimize the spread, we must be able to identify the contacts of all the people who have tested positive for COVID-19. This therefore means once you are confirmed as a case, we will contact you and request you to avail a full list of people you have come into contact with 2 days from the onset of the symptoms. Simply put, if you started experiencing symptoms on Wednesday, you must disclose people that you came into contact with on Monday up to the date that you are informed about your positive results. It allows us to close the loop so that we find out who could still be at risk. Many of them may not be really high risk, but we will have to make that analysis and make the call. The form that a patient who has tested positive is required to complete is called the COVID-19 contact line list. Out of that, the people who analyze will then go through them and check what was the level of contact. The tracing team will then make the contact with those contact people, both physically and digitally. Some will be phoned, some will be visited, so that they are officially and be informed that they are officially contacts that have tested positive. They will then be taken through the screening and testing process. I'm aware that there is a strong debate about whether government can disclose another patient's information to his or her contact. Whilst we know that there is an ethical obligation not to disclose patient information with this outbreak, we will exercise Regulation 18, which stated that the information concerning a case, contact, or a carrier of the virus may be disclosed for the purpose of the public health surveillance, investigation, and intervention. This therefore means that if a confirmed case refuses to provide us with information, we'll go to the extent of making a public announcement that anyone that has come into contact with a specific person, disclosing their name, must present themselves to the public. In other words, if we ask you to go to quarantine, please go to quarantine. If you don't go to quarantine, we'll then enforce it. Again, if we ask you to give us a contact list, please give us a contact list. If you don't do it, we'll then enforce it. This is where the extent to which we have gone in dealing with this outbreak. We are then pleased, as I've said earlier, that there are, of those who have tested positive, 5 have already negative, and we are really expecting more and more will be getting negative. And I think for some reason we really are not seeing very severe cases, as it were. So the point I wanted to just raise is that we will later on make a direct announcement and call those people who are part of this church gathering in the Free State that we cannot find. We're going to check how many more we've been able to identify. Those that are missing, we're going to now make a public announcement that the people who are part of this church gathering need to come forward. We'll give them numbers which to phone so that they must come forward and be tested. Our concern about it is that of those that were found were in the church, we found a number who were positive, but in addition, we are aware that people have moved and spread to different parts of the country. For that reason, it means that they may well be coming into contact with people and might be potentially posing a risk of them being infected. This means, therefore, that in that context, we want to try and contain that situation. Otherwise, we still want to encourage people. Now there's a flu season coming. We will be encouraging particularly those elderly to have the flu vaccines, and also those who have underlying illnesses to have the flu vaccines, just to make sure we limit the impact of the influenza. And then, of course, we will also be increasing our testing capacity. We are going to be getting over a lot of hitches that we're going through right now, and that at some point we would want to target the areas where we've identified contacts so that we can check if there would have been any significant spread at that level. It's still encouraging to see that we don't have many who are internal transmission, but that out of our process, once we freeze literally everyone in this kind of package, we are then able to go to the areas where, particularly highly densely populated areas, so that we are able to help to check the prevalence of the infection. That we'll be doing in the next few weeks. Obviously, some of the hitches on the delays relate to the fact that supplies will be affected by the changes in the flight schedules. So we'll be dealing with that, and myself and my colleague, Minister Patel, are going to be meeting up with the manufacturers of pharmaceutical products and those who are involved in supplying of health products, so that we can see what mechanism we have to expedite the supplies so that we don't run into shortages. Yes, now I've got the dates. The church name in the Free State is called the Divine Restoration Church Ministries. And they had a conference on the 9th to the 14th of March 2020 in Bloemfontein in the past few weeks, 9th to the 14th. Would like to request all those who have been part of that gathering to come forth, contact the Ministry of Health, the Department of Health in the Free State, so that they can be assisted. We can therefore go through the processing to look at their own situation, test them, and also just check if there are other people who need to be given attention to. We do want to make this as a public call, and it is important for us to make this. And I may as well say that the regulations actually do allow us at a certain point, if an individual does not come forth and there's been a contact, and we think that his situation might pose a risk of infection to other people, we can actually publish the name to say those who have come into contact with this individual, either contact him to come over to us, or they themselves must actually make themselves available. We really want to leave no stone unturned to be able to deal with this issue of reducing the spread of the infection. At that point, Minister, I want to say thank you very much. I hope that it does clarify. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Zweli-Mkhize. We will now, maybe before we take our colleagues so that they tell us how they are going to implement the measures that the President spoke to yesterday from the economic cluster, because the Minister of Health will be leaving in no time. There is a meeting of traditional leaders that he has to attend. Now, if you allow me, colleagues, let's just take questions that are directed to the Minister before we start, so that we conclude that and we allow the Minister to leave, because the meeting is now at 11 o'clock. I hope I've got your permission to do so. Now, we will take questions on what the Minister of Health has spoken to in this press briefing. And again, we won't take many. We will take a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. That's quite good. Thank you very much. Let's start.
Minister, Minister Mkhize, please. How is the quick action by South Africa on the lockdown announced last night by the President, following the lead of China, who is now into recovery as a result of their actions and their economy is starting to open up? Can we learn something from their methods? And a question that relates to what was said last night, tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands. We need hardware and we need respirators because what we have in our private hospitals and our government hospitals will be an adequate supply of respirators. Are we reaching out to our partners for help and assistance, as in China's coming out of it? Have we approached China for help? They're helping South Korea. Cuba is helping Italy. Do we know who's going to help us? Because that would be an encouragement to know that we are not standing alone with a shortage of hardware. I think that frightens a lot of people.
Thank you. Next.
Good morning, Minister. This is Christian du Plessis from Netwerk 24. Minister, just how long could this outbreak last? Could it last longer than the 3 weeks that was proposed by the President? And then also, does healthcare workers have all the necessary equipment, respirators, to deal with the virus in the coming weeks?
Number 3.
Karabule Hlahle, CNBC Africa. I'd just like to ask the Minister when he expects that our curve, our infection curve, could possibly start flattening. Does he have a date or a period in mind? And also, we have heard of RH Bophelo, which is a black-owned medical company offering its facilities to government should need be. I'd just like to know whether the other private healthcare providers do it. Thank you.
Next.
Minister Itekani here from Newsroom Africa. I just want to know how many people that have tested positive or that are in hospital are currently in ICU.
Good morning, Criselda Lewis from SABC Television News. Minister, I'd like to know if there's any concern from government at this stage. This 24-hour period before we have the lockdown officially start, there might be some people moving from urban areas to rural areas during this time, and we're already monitoring and seeing that there's a lot of panic buying that is taking place. The queues are absolutely huge. And also, are you getting some help or sharing information with other international countries, for example, China with that experience and Cuba who is assisting in Italy? Thank you.
Minister Mkhize, you can speak from there, Minister.
Thank you. This lockdown has actually been based on looking at the experience of various countries. China is one, Italy is one. We're looking at other countries that also didn't do it. We're looking at what's happening in Korea. So we've taken lessons from a number of countries, and we are trying to find the best way because the disease doesn't necessarily behave the same way in every country. So we have learned quite a bit from various countries. Certainly China, for being able to arrest the spread at 80,000, right, 81,000 now, has actually been a very important issue. As you will notice that the case of China in South Africa is the reverse. China had the epicenter in Wuhan, one area, locked it down, spread to the other parts of China, and 28 cases went out of China to the rest of the world immediately. That was all at that time, into 5 countries in the world. South Africa, we didn't have a case inside the country. Instead, we started having people who came from about 12, 15 countries outside South Africa into South Africa. And they didn't settle in one center, they've settled in different parts of the world. So it's a reverse of what is happening. So we'll not be able to do exactly what other countries have done. Now, we have a number of countries that we are seeking assistance from, and I'm sure my colleague, Minister Patel, will talk about it. There are some products that we might want to source from China. We've been in touch with India. Right now, some of the current stuff that we need is out in Germany, in South Korea, in India. And so we are actually reaching out to many countries to be able to assist us where we can. But I must also say that there's been a lot of willingness and support from many countries to say, whatever we can do, can share with you our experience, and we'll also be prepared to share with you our products. And so we are looking at all of that. How long will the outbreak last? I don't think anybody can ever tell us that. The pattern for every country is not the same, and all of us are still learning from this. I don't think China could have told you at the start that they would have been dismantling their hospitals at the end of 3 months. But you wouldn't have even imagined that Italy would by now would have had mortality rate which is higher than China, even almost at less numbers of people infected. So it's not possible to give any prediction. And if we were to try and give a prediction, it would be misleading to you. So we will not try. I just indicated that for the next week or two, we still expect the numbers to be going up. Then if there's any change, we can expect probably it might start maybe sometime after that. Exactly when, I think it's not correct to be able to postulate. But the reason why we're mentioning that the numbers might be going up, we don't want anyone turning around and saying, oh yeah, but you got a lockdown, why are the numbers going up? This is disease pattern that we can't predict. There's human behavior, there are external factors that drive the conduct of individuals and the conduct of the infection. So I think it is fair for us to say that, we're going to be working on it as we move along. The equipment that we have at the moment, we have not needed to use all the respirators. Right now, we've only got 2 patients who are supposed to be in ICU. I didn't quite get the sense that they were in the respirators. We'll keep checking. I'll check on the latest reports. But right now, they were ICU, but they were not really on respirators. The real issue here is that it depends how far the disease goes as to whether we can cope with it or not. Right now, we can still manage quite a bit. All the provinces are opening up extra beds to be able to dedicate them to the treatment or the admission of those who are infected with COVID-19. And also we have got private sector willing to share their beds, and we are already working with all of them to look at what can be done. When a situation like this arises, we'll basically utilize whatever facilities that are available, public or private. That the understanding is very clear amongst all of us. So those companies that have offered their facilities in private hospitals, we appreciate that, but I must say that the large number of those who are in private hospitals have actually offered willingness to assist. In any case, under a situation like this, no one can refuse to work with government. Again, the question about when the curve will flatten, I think let's just work hard and avoid fake news and make sure we send the correct information to everyone, and then we'll be able to get better results out of that. Concern about people moving on the next 24 hours, well, I'm sure there will be some movement of people. We wouldn't be sure how that would, what numbers that would be, but I think it's important to say the natural migration on the Easter weekend, based on the fact that everyone knows that it's a holiday time and so on, is not the same when there's a plea from the government to say, please stay at home. We believe that people, South Africans, are very respectful people. They actually understand this issue is very important, and therefore many of them are going to comply. There may well be those who might be under pressure, but I think many of them will comply. We are discouraging panic buying, hoarding of stuff. We think that is not correct, and people must try and make sure that they take it easy. Government is actually making all the efforts to secure that the essentials don't run out, and the minister is going to talk to us about those. There is even a way of dealing with those who do that, and I'm sure I'll leave that for the minister to indicate. But the long and short of it, I think one of the, sad as the situation is, one of the advantages is that it will actually help us to remember that you don't live alone here. We're all South Africans, and our lives our lives depend on each other. So the time for sharing a spirit of Ubuntu, to look after yourselves in such a way that you are able to support the next person and not work towards their disadvantage, because that's going to make the disease, the spread worse. So I would like to appeal to our people to be considerate, to think about each other, to support each other, not to actually go all out to, cause a disadvantage for others, because we all need one another. Once this infection is spread, all of us will be affected. But if we help each and every one of us to cope with it, then of course we're saving ourselves. And I think that message needs to come out strongly. We need Ubuntu at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. The next minister is Minister Togo Didiza, who will then speak in the area of her portfolio.
Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu, to my colleagues, as well as the Directors General present here, ladies and gentlemen from the media. Indeed, Minister Mkhize has highlighted what the President has said yesterday in terms of the lockdown, and I'm sure all of us have also listened to what President said. I just want to indicate to all of us that in the statement that President made yesterday indicated that the agriculture and food sector is one of the essential systems that will remain open, particularly for the livelihood of all of us, and therefore we will remain operational. And to this extent, I actually want to thank the farmers, the producers in the agri-business sector, as well as the farm workers who remain to be the bedrock for our national food system, both in South Africa as well as in the region, because we know our interrelationship between us and the SADC region when it comes to our food system. Agricultural food production in all its form will remain uncompromised. This includes all services such as veterinary services and advisory services that will have to continue to support the producers. Live auctions of livestock and sale of other agricultural commodities will continue, but under strict conditions as prescribed by the President. For instance, we are not going to allow in the auction places that there are more than 100 people at any given point, and we are engaging with the industry to make sure that there is compliance. Export and imports of critical agricultural commodities and the logistical measures will continue during this lockdown period to ensure that there is global and national food security. This is not only limited to retailers, but the entire food value chain, from farm-related operations, agro-processing, and food manufacturing, logistics and related services, in the wholesale and retail sector, and all support functions that ensure efficient delivery of the agro-food system. We've been working with the industry since last week to identify what are the core elements that needs to remain operational and how we protect those workers in those entities, and what measures we take to ensure safe hygiene in all our operations. As a nation, we boast for being self-sufficient in food production, and a part of this year's supply is yet to be harvested, particularly yellow and white maize, which promises to be a bumper field crop, and citrus harvest also promises to be good. And these processes will continue as normal as foundation of South Africa's food system. We know that in the maize area, particularly, we are going for the harvesting season. So we're working with the farmers to ensure that harvesting continue uninterrupted, but that as it happens under very strict conditions that comply with the restrictions that have been announced, particularly in terms of the numbers of the workers in the fields and also the protection that those workers require. I'll be making regular updates on crop estimates to inform the country of our critical commodity supply. To ensure that we do not have inflated prices in the sector, I think those announcements will be critical. Food price monitoring will also be conducted on critical food basket commodities, and reports will be given to the nation on a regular basis. The department has also set aside a package of 1.2 billion to address the effects of the coronavirus and ensure sustainable food production post the pandemic. As I indicated, that the sector will be continuing to produce, particularly your vegetables and some of the proteins that will be required. The department soon will make the details of this package together with the application channels that are available. We are working with the Land Bank, and 100 million will be transferred to assist farmers under distress, those that have got loans with the Land Bank. And I hope that the other financial institutions will also make arrangements to ensure that farmers who have got loans with them do get supported during this tough period. Together with the industry, we are working on a sector operational procedures that would ensure adherence to the measures announced by the President. This includes the provision of sanitizers to employees, as well as running water within the sector, especially for farm workers. We are also urging the food value chain role players, such as the agribusiness industries, to strictly comply and adhere to strict health regulations to contain and arrest this disease, as we strive to supply food for the nation. I appeal to the public, as I've already indicated, that we are self-sufficient at the moment, and therefore there is no need to embark on panic buying, as the President has indicated, and Mr. Mkize has also responded to some of the questions that have been asked here. The country has sufficient food supplies. Panic buying will only cause disruption and inconvenience in the food system. I therefore urge you also as the media to continue to communicate that message to our citizens, that there is no need for panic or even panic buying in the manner in which we address the challenges that we are facing. To the wholesalers and retailers, we also urge them not to engage in price hiking at such a crucial time when it's unnecessary. All of us have an important role to play in the supply of food and the fight against COVID-19. We ask that you continue to serve the nation and help ensure that food security at this critical juncture is attained. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Titiza. We will take all the ministers, then we'll take questions thereafter. Minister Nasim.
Thanks, Mvelase. The colleagues and ladies and gentlemen from the media. Our teams under NETLEC from business, labor, community stakeholders, and government have been meeting since they formed a rapid response team, which meets almost every day. And at the center of this is how we are going to support the workers during the 21 days shutdown, or if they lose their jobs through the virus. And one of the issues which comes very strongly, we are being asked, is the issue of, will the UIF be able to cover the informal workers? Remember that a large cohort of the workers will remain at work in the emergency services. You're talking about medical, security, and some industries, and what has been called the essential services. You're talking the police, the firefighters. You're also talking about those who are dealing with water supply, the sewage and sanitation. You're talking about the ICT, data centers, the fiber ones. You're also talking about those who are dealing with the generation, transmission, and the distribution of electricity, because these are called essential services, because if interrupted, this would endanger life. personal safety, and the health of the whole population or part of the population. So there will still be people at work in some of the sectors, but we expect that those workers must get the appropriate protective gear when they are at work. And Minister Titiza has just confirmed that in industries such as food production, these remain very critical because food must be available. For workers who are affected by this 21 days lockdown or become ill, from the side of the Department of Employment and Labor, the main support will be as follows. In the first instance, we're activating the Basic Conditions of Employment Act rights for those workers to seek leave and annual leave. So there's nothing extraordinary there. It's there in the law. Thereafter, employers and labor, through NEDLEC, have agreed to negotiate the special leave conditions. For those who fall ill as a result of work, they will be covered by the Compensation Fund or the Compensation Act. The UIF, that is Unemployment Insurance Fund, existing benefits for illness, reduced work time, and unemployment will then kick in. In addition, the UIF will compensate the affected workers through a new national disaster benefit. But what we do not want to do is to talk about the figures. For a simple reason, we can't just pronounce figures and raise expectations, then we are not able to fulfill that later on. We find that it's too expensive. Our actuaries are busy with the work, crunching the figures. They are meeting with all the NEDLEC stakeholders, and we expect that tomorrow we'll be making detailed announcement, including how this is going to be administered. Remember that we're talking about millions of workers who are going to be claiming from the UIF. If we're talking about that, we must find a way of decentralizing that. We have agreed that we're going to use the companies. We're also going to use the bargaining councils, where we're going to advance the money to them and also allow them to pay those employees, but with very strict conditions. And there will be auditors who are following all those monies. There will be strict audits after the big storm, so that there's no abuse of the money. So the benefit then will be calculated on a scale, on a particular amount, which will not be less than the minimum wage. Remember, the minimum wage now, it's 3,500. Another program which is already existing under the UIF, it's a program called TERS, which will be expanded and expedited. That program is the Temporary Employer-Employee Relief Scheme, which is funded by the UIF to assist distressed companies in the form of subsidies to fund directly the workers' wages. So one of the conditions is that the company embark upon a turnaround or sustainable programs. But this is overseen by the Council for Mediation, Council for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, the CCMA. And we will be making information available tomorrow. But already, most of the employers or companies are aware that they obtain the application forms and all the relevant details through the website of the UIF or the TERS website, which is info.ters@labour.gov.za. The UIF has also produced an easy guide of these measures and requirements for distribution to employers, together with the contact details in each province. But over and above that, we are going to be having a dedicated line for the companies and even the workers who will be seeking the information. This will be a dedicated line under the UIF. But more generally, in relation to the virus, as the department and network, we've reminded the parties of their responsibilities in terms of occupational health and safety, in terms of them taking all measures to protect the health of the employees, including conducting the risk assessment, providing the necessary protective equipment, and to put in place systems to deal with any outbreak in the workplace. The issue of the informal sector, the workers who are not registered in the UIF or with the compensation fund, how will they be assisted? Unfortunately, from our side, we can't be able to deal with this matter because it's beyond this particular legislation. However, if you listened to the president last night, he stated that a safety net would be developed to assist those in the informal sector. This is still work in progress, but already includes, if we listened carefully, it includes shelters for the homeless and those who are unable to self-isolate. And, but what is very clear to us, if we can be able to pay for these expanded commitments, all undertakings by the fund, both the UIF and the compensation fund, are based on the actuarial calculations. These will, of course, be updated as the situation unfolds. The administrative capacity we have at the moment never anticipated these huge numbers which are likely to come. But if the companies come to the party, the bargaining councils come to the party, we think that we'll be able to deal with that influx. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Minister Nasi. The next colleague to speak is Minister Patel. Again, we are still emphasizing how are we implementing the measures that the President spoke to as he addressed the nation yesterday. Mr. Patel.
Thank you very much, colleague, and good morning to members of the media. The address by the President last night recognized that saving lives must be our priority, and we need to draw on all the resources in the economy and within each of the major economic players to come through this with as little damage as possible. Across the world, countries are now doing lockdowns, and we want to ensure that in South Africa it's managed in strong partnership with our people, with large and small businesses, and with workers and consumers. Last night, the President identified a number of key interventions. Over the next day or two, we'll be releasing more information as we finalize key programs and interventions, and these are now being done on an expedited basis. I want to talk through a few. The first is the IDC facility. The President announced that the IDC has put together a package, together with the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, of more than 3 billion rand for industrial funding to address the situation of vulnerable firms and to fast-track funding for companies that are critical to our efforts to fight the virus and its economic impact. This facility will be available to South African-owned businesses, and there are some elements to it. The first is a special intervention of 500 million rand that is allocated for trade finance to import essential medical products. The second is a 700 million rand facility for working capital, equipment and machinery. We're also addressing surges in demand to ensure food security is prioritized. It's points that my colleague Minister Didiza has been making. Support for supply chains that are interrupted by large companies closing down. Working capital to ensure energy security, and working capital for component manufacturers. So the IDC has made available 3 billion rand in the next quarter to support businesses during this crisis. Essential services that fall outside the normal IDC sectors will now be considered. So we've relaxed the arrangements in the IDC. And for existing IDC clients that are large numbers of South African businesses, the IDC is already in contact with its business partners to consider repayment deferments on a case-by-case basis. By late afternoon today, details of this will be on the IDC website. Second, I deal with the issue of price increases. Last week, we published a list of 22 products that the Consumer and Competition Commission will be monitoring particularly closely to ensure that there are no unjustified price increases. They include basic foods, personal care products, and hygiene products like disinfectant, hand sanitizer, and cleaning agents, as well as key medical supplies like surgical masks and gloves. They also include rice, maize meal, milk, canned vegetables, meats, and other products. We have had complaints about individuals and firms increasing prices unjustifiably. The Consumer and Competition Commissions met yesterday and are now investigating 11 firms who have been found to be selling products like face masks, hand sanitizers, and others for high prices and abusing the situation. More firms are now being investigated and prosecutions will follow. The penalties are quite sharp, fines and penalties of R1 million, fines or penalties of up to 10% of a company's turnover and up to 1 year in jail. The 11 firms that the regulators are investigating has been brought to the attention of the authorities by ordinary consumers. We thank our people for sharing that information. The National Consumer Commission has established a toll-free hotline, 0800 014 880, 0800 014 880, and they can also be reached on their social media Twitter handle. On competition exemptions for banks, on Friday we issued an exemption for banks under the Competition Act to coordinate on measures which can be used to support businesses and ordinary account holders, ordinary citizens during this period. It was published in the Government Gazette yesterday. The exemptions will allow banks to work together to devise programs and relief measures which can help small businesses and consumers as well as firms in distress through these financial and economic challenges. In particular, the exemptions will enable the banks to coordinate on matters like payment holidays and debt relief for business and individual citizens subject to financial stress, to put limitations on asset repossessions of business and individual citizens, and to coordinate on the extension of credit lines, additional credit lines to individuals and businesses who are subject to financial stress. The exemptions will allow banks to work together in ensuring continued functioning of the payment system, as well as sharing information and resources to ensure continued availability of banknotes at ATM, at branches and businesses. So we've basically done extraordinary things to enable the banking system to remain strong and intact so that South Africans can look to accessing the banks in the next 3 weeks. Next, I turn to the issue of essential services. Last night, President Ramaphosa announced that companies that are essential to the production and transportation of food, of basic goods, and of medical supplies will remain open during the lockdown period. This means that essential personnel required for the continued functioning of these companies during the lockdown will be exempted from the stay-home provisions. We will be publishing further guidelines tomorrow ahead of the lockdown, which begins on Thursday evening, just after midnight. In other words, the lockdown covers the whole of Friday and onwards. I'll make a few preliminary comments now, but more firm details will be published in the Government Gazette by tomorrow. The President noted that grocery stores, supermarkets, and spaza shops, I should add, will remain open during the lockdown. We call on our people to limit the trips to shopping centers for the purpose of shopping for food and basic goods only. All essential items, and the President outlined a list which include food and beverages, medical supplies, personal products, hygiene products, cleaning articles, will remain available throughout the lockdown and the period of the national disaster. This means that all businesses that are essential for the production and distribution of these items will be open during the lockdown. Businesses who remain open during the lockdown will be required to do so with the staff required to ensure that the service or production is uninterrupted. These businesses will also be required to take the necessary protocols to ensure adequate hygiene and social distancing. Consumer-facing businesses like grocery stores, supermarkets, pharmacies, and spaza shops especially will be asked to educate their staff and customers on the required protocols and to enable social distancing between customers. There are a number of categories of essential services that, due to time constraints, the President could not mention yesterday. These include essential staff in the following areas that are being looked at now for inclusion in the gazetted list. They would include those responsible for essential care for the elderly and sick persons, including home care and old age homes. So to reassure South Africans that we are aware of elderly people, ill people, who are absolutely dependent on the care and support that they have, and we will make sure that these are facilitated. Essential private security services for the protection of property and persons. All essential back office services to enable salary, wages, and human resource departments to work so that we have smooth management of wage and salary payments through this period. Those assisting in transportation of food and other essentials to people's homes, including online retail, as well as transport systems that support any of the essential services. My colleague, Minister Didiza, has spoken about essential animal welfare and emergency veterinary services. We'll also be looking at key maintenance systems required at workplaces to avoid serious damage to economic assets, where the interruption of that service will destroy critical working areas, factories, or machinery. Members of Parliament, provincial legislatures, municipal councils, and their core staff, as well as the government departments and public entities and their staff responsible to assist with implementation of these measures, will need to be working to make the country safe and to implement the measures that the President announced. and members of the media and the broadcasting services who will serve as a vital communication between ourselves and the public. Transportation of fuel, of food, and of basic goods supply trucks between SADC countries will also remain open. Now, this is not a comprehensive list. We will be publishing it. We know that there's been many queries. South Africans want to have certainty, and we will provide that certainty. But we've shared this to give an indication of the practical way in which we're approaching this, limiting the number of people, but ensuring that there are basic services, essential services available across the nation. As Minister Mkhize said earlier, we looked carefully over the last few days at the experience of a number of countries that have begun to implement lockdowns and are building on those experiences. During the lockdown, we strongly encourage all companies whose employees are able to work from home to make the necessary arrangements for them to do so, as we need to maintain as much of economic activity as we can during this critical period, so that we generate resources to finance the measures that we are undertaking and we are able to save lives. The sooner we slow the spread of the disease, the sooner we can return to normal life and normal business. While some of us may be exempt from the lockdown because of the nature of our work, none of us are exempt from susceptibility to the virus. Turning next to the supply chains and securing basic supplies, a number of businesses are essential services, and as the President indicated, will remain open during this period. With a limit of 100 people, that limit does not apply to essential services. We will still need all the affected businesses to take steps to protect workers through social distancing and public hygiene measures. We are working with the Minister of Police and the Minister of Employment and Labour to ensure that police officers and health inspectors are well briefed on the kind of businesses which will be allowed to continue with their operations. As I've indicated earlier, these businesses must, however, take all the necessary precautions to ensure adequate social distance among customers and staff, and to ensure that we do everything possible to counteract the spread of the virus. Where staff are not critical to the functioning of the operation, we encourage employers to allow those staff members to stay at home. A number of measures have already been identified for those inessential services. They include providing hand sanitizers at workplaces as people enter, at key workstations, when they leave, disinfecting surfaces, checking clocking arrangements, canteen facilities, and so on. We are going into the month-end period where the numbers of South Africans in grocery stores and supermarkets naturally increase. We're working with major grocery retailers to ensure smooth protocols on social distancing and that shelves remain well stocked. My colleague, Minister Didiza, made the call earlier that we appeal to our people to remain calm. We have supply lines, the whole of the food production, from agriculture to the factories, to the transport system, to the supermarkets, will all be exempt from the lockdown, so we can ensure the smooth supply of food. So the only problem comes when people rush to the shops to stock up, because then there are temporary shortages, because the retailers then have to get more goods from their warehouses to the stores. So to avoid that, let's all just act responsibly in this period and ensure that we take only the minimum required and that we can go back to the supermarkets in a few days' time. On the Solidarity Fund, last night the President announced the creation of the Solidarity Response Fund. It's designed to unite the nation and accelerate the country's response to COVID-19. The focus of the fund is in 4 areas. It's to alleviate the suffering and distress caused by the virus to the country, and to mobilize the support of business and civil society in support of government's efforts. Government last night made available an initial 150 million rand as seed funding, and a number of businesses have already today contacted us, excuse me, because they will be contributing within the next few days to the fund. From the government resources, 100 million of this is from National Treasury, and 50 million is from the national lotteries. The chairperson of the fund is Ms. Gloria Serobi, and the vice chairperson is A.D. Enthoven. The fund, as we indicated last night, as the President indicated, will be independently administered and transparently governed through an independent board to ensure that funds are effectively and efficiently used. I pointed to 4 areas of the fund. The first is prevent. It's preventative and supporting measures to flatten the curve by lowering infection rates. Detect and understand the magnitude of the infection problem and where it is spreading so that we can take action on a specific basis. Care, assist with the management of those people in hospital or medical care. And support those people whose lives have been disrupted by COVID-19. As the President indicated, organized business is assisting with the initial formation of the fund, and we are also drawing in support from other parts of society. Details of how to donate is available on the fund's website, www.solidarityfund.co.za. www.solidarityfund.co.za. I spoke earlier about the measures we took in respect of the finance sector. We will publish today a special government gazette to enable shopping mall owners and tenants to consider coordinating their actions and reaching agreements to address matters like payment holidays or rental discounts to tenants, limitations on evictions, and other measures that are necessary to ensure that shops and others whose income will be falling sharply during the lockdown have the necessary flexibility and space to sit through this period with as little requirements on them as possible so that they can all emerge at the end of the lockdown period intact. These will initially cover 3 areas and will be expanded as required. They will cover personal care functions, restaurants, and shops selling clothing, footwear, and home textiles. This is not the full list. As I've indicated, we'll be adding to this list as the situation requires it. Finally, I would like to deal with the issue of trade with neighbors. We will take all steps to keep open trade links with neighbors to ensure that we have food supply across the region and that we come through this together. The controls on movement of people will not affect the movement of goods across borders with our neighbors. So may I then thank my colleague, and we will, as I indicate, provide further details during the course of today and plan to gazette tomorrow the list of products and essential services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Patel. We'll now call upon Minister of Tourism, Minister Kupai Ngubane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu. Good morning, colleagues, fellow ministers, and fellow South Africans. Just to indicate from our side, there are a couple of things that the President has announced yesterday following from the announcement on the 15th that affects us as the sector. Firstly, it's around the issues of travel. As indicated, that we've been working closely with the sector together with our tourists, both those who've been in the country and those that arrived when the flights were still coming last week. Because once the restrictions were put in place, it immediately meant that those who were here either had to leave or stay, others decided to conclude their visits. and still tour, as you'd have seen with some of the incidences that we had experienced, and I'll talk to that. But mainly those who have been prohibited, for example, from coming from high-risk areas. We've been working closely with transport, and they've been supporting us so that we are able to communicate to the tourist markets that we've been working with in order to make sure that there isn't any hitches. President yesterday announced the termination of international flights at Lanseria Airport, and I hope the sector has been able to listen to that, but also we'll be working with our sector as the tour operators to ensure that tourists actually are able to find alternatives as provided by government. International travelers who've been in the country, President announced that those who have been in the country after the 9th of March from high-risk countries will be confined to a 14-day quarantine period in the establishments that they are. We're saying hotels and establishments because we are aware that some of them are not in hotels, are in Airbnbs, others are in lodges, bed and breakfast across the country. We have been in contact with our sector, trying to understand who is still in the country, tourists that are here. We have created a database, and we've sent a communication through our South African tourism, requesting all establishments to provide us with details of the tourists that are still in the country, their details, the date of arrival in the country, which areas they've visited, because it's very important if they've been touring, where they have been, and their date of departure from the country. We have literally requested across the country over the weekend that we are appealing to our sector to ensure that we reduce movements as the government has been requesting, and therefore requested that tourist attractions be closed or minimized. This has led to a number of questions raised, and we did because if you notice, there were 2 incidences that were related to our tourists that have been involved in touring. Some of them, unfortunately, having taken the test, having shown symptoms, but did not disclose, and therefore continued with their trips and putting lives of South Africans at risk. And we have issued a condemnation because we do condemn this conduct. This is not what we expect from either our tourists or from people who are operating in this sector. So we are saying to our tour operators, we are saying to our tour guides, you have an obligation to this country to be responsible and protect South Africans, and not only South Africans, but protect the tourists themselves. We continue as well to request our tour operators and facilities, which means our accommodations, to cooperate with us. We've requested them to say those who are booked in their hospitalities, at least let's ensure as they leave, they go straight to the airport. We must be able to verify their travel details so that we do not have incidences where we are accused as a sector to have been involved in the spreading of the disease. So we have been able to interact with the sector, and we are receiving cooperation. We've been talking to TBCSA together with all the associations, and we are saying to members who are not part of either the associations or the TBCSA, the information is available in the website of the South African tourism website, so that we can be able to assist you, get the details, and so that when the tracers are looking for information, we have it in our database. The other issue that the President spoke about was the issue of international tourists that are no longer going to be allowed to come from high-risk areas, which has been happening. But again, in terms of those, because some of them would have finished 14 days in the country and are actually wanted to leave, or facilitated by their embassies. Just want to indicate that we've been working together with Minister Mkhize to ensure that tourists who are leaving will be subjected to testing at the 3 airports, OR Tambo, Cape Town, and Durban. And we are therefore appealing to tour operators and individuals who are traveling that please make some extra time for you to be able to be processed before you get into the immigrations. This we appeal because we want to make sure that we can, as a tourism sector, be seen as responsible and not be seen as people who've acted recklessly and continued to spread the virus. The other matter that the President spoke about yesterday relates to business enterprise in distress and the support that will be provided by the Tourism Department. We have set aside, through the approval of National Treasury, additional 200 million that will be for supporting SMMEs in the tourism sector. I do understand that this is not going to be sufficient because we are a sector that almost has come to a standstill, and therefore various categories of businesses would be affected. We do understand there are big businesses that will either fall under the support that will be provided broadly by government through measures being either tax relief or the issues around breaks of payments of their loans with the banks and other facilities that have been announced. But we are saying with us specifically, we are looking at the small businesses that are likely not to survive. And those are, we categorize them as SMMEs that fall within an annual turnover that doesn't exist 2.5 million. Because we do believe that this are the people that are likely not to survive, even 3 months without any activity in their businesses. We'll publish in our website the criteria, but just to indicate, it has to be registered, fully registered companies with CPIC. Turnover must not exceed 2.5 million per annum. They must have a valid tax clearance certificate, so we are looking for compliant business people in our sector. And they must actually also have been in business for more than a year. But again, we will ask for information that shows that the business is in distress because of COVID-19. It shouldn't be somebody who's already have been battling before even COVID-19 started. So we're looking for those as a result of COVID-19. And this will ensure, in terms of the mechanism, we're going to look at beneficiaries across the provinces. We're going to make sure that there's a balance between, as well, youth and women businesses. Will actually also include racial categories so that it's not one race that benefits, but based on our BEE broad-based Black economic empowerment criteria that the sector, the codes, as per the amended codes that the sector has adopted. So we'll follow that. And this will be in terms of accommodation, hospitality and related services, travel and related services. So this is where it's limited in terms of the criteria, but those who still need more details, it will be uploaded in terms of our sector, but over the department's website. The other issue that we are looking at is to be able, because most of the time we find that our sector has been saying we've called COVID-19 call center. They deal with medical issues. We're battling because we do not understand, because we are affected, whether what we should do with our travelers, what we should do with the people that we have, or if we have. So we have decided as the department, but this is specifically for tourism related. The call center that we've always been operating as the department for our sector has extended hours. Unfortunately, we'll not put it for overnight. It won't be a 24 hours because we do believe this is specifically for business related activities and questions that relates to tourism sector. We do also want to appeal. We've had incidences of non-compliance, I must say, from our restaurant sector. Many of them did comply, some didn't, and I want to appeal in the few days that we still have of operating not in lockdown, where we still have people in our restaurants, can we ensure that there's registers? Can we ensure that the prescripts that have been announced still are adhered to, because we do get report from Minister Bekicele that sometimes they find our sector not to be compliant. And again, lastly, from my side is to appeal that we can't all be essential services. I've received a lot of calls that says, I'm doing this in this sector, therefore am I essential service? As Minister Patel has announced, the list will be published, but we are appealing that we can all be essential service. Otherwise, the lockdown will not have a meaning. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you very much, Minister. Goodbye. We now will call upon Minister Chrissy to speak to us on how are we implementing the measures announced by the President in the environment, forestry and fisheries arena.
Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu, and good morning to colleagues and to members of the media. As other colleagues have said before me, when the President spoke last night, he emphasized the importance that we should be saving lives and livelihoods as we confront this pandemic. Consequently, you've already heard that there will be various sectors that will be exempt, either because they are part of the food value chain or else because they are performing certain essential services. With regard to our department, the first sector that is exempt from the provisions is the fisheries sector, because obviously the fisheries sector is crucial to our domestic food security. And together with the fisheries sector, we would also include harbour, slipping, and docking services that pertain to fishing vessels. We understand that those who have existing rights in the fishing sector might be in a situation currently where they would need to renew certain permits, either to their fishing, related to their fishing activities or to their vessels and so on. We are granting from today a 3-month exemption for the renewal of all of those permits, so that operators are not forced to come into our offices or to have to come into contact with our staff. We will, after a period of 3 months, then be reviewing whether that provision would be necessary for renewal going forward. But obviously, this exemption only applies to those who have existing fishing rights and would need to be renewing permits that fall within the provisions of those fishing rights. The second sector you have heard, which is exempt, is the forestry sector, and that obviously would include all of those aspects in the forestry value chain. That would also include the sawmills. And these activities include clearing of state and commercial forests, fire services. As we know, in the Western Cape, we are currently in the fire season, and in other parts of the country, we would shortly be moving into the fire season. So those fire services will remain in place. Nursery services for all of our saplings, and in due course, if this situation continues, planting, which would normally take place in the spring. Our department is also responsible for support services to municipalities with regard to waste management services, as well as licensing and enforcement of all forms of disposal of dangerous and toxic waste substances. Those particular activities will continue, and obviously we will be addressing, where necessary, how we support municipal waste services over this period. We also have, as you would know, 19 national parks, a number of botanical gardens, and the Tshwane Zoo. All of those parks, botanical gardens, and the zoo are closed to visitors. However, with regard to our national parks, we do have existing international visitors who would fall into the category of visitors from high-risk countries that were mentioned by the President in his speech last night. We are currently developing a list of all of those visitors. All of them have been placed in isolation areas in our parks, and we will be in discussion with the Department of Health and also DIRCO once we have those lists of visitors in terms of the way forward. With regard to our national parks, we will continue with all aspects of our ranger services and also all aspects of our wildlife management services so that we continue to protect our assets and also protect communities from those wildlife. We are also continuing with our animal care services in the Tshwane Zoo while those services are closed down for public visits. Other services that will continue, and we will provide a full list as Minister Patel has indicated in the Government Gazette, include all of our enforcement services, and those would relate to activities such as poaching, air quality, oil spills, chemical spills, and sewage spills. We are also continuing with vital aspects of the weather services, including forecasting. We do have a number of small businesses that would be in the biodiversity economy, the fishing economy, and also the waste economy. We will be in contact with the Department of Small Business and also the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition to receive advice on how we can refer those small businesses to relevant business support and rescue processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Chrissy. The last minister to speak is the minister who will be speaking on small business and entrepreneurs, Minister Chaveni.
Good morning and thank you. As the President has said, small businesses will be hardest hit during these trying times. Some of them have already started to feel the pressure, and we had already started working on the mechanisms to support them. From the onset, let me thank, on behalf of the SMME sector and all entrepreneurs, thank the Johann Rupert family and the Oppenheimer family for their act of patriotism. When we grew up, we knew of patriotic bourgeoisies, and for me, they fit in that category of patriotic bourgeoisies, if more of them could do the same. I also want to indicate that we have several instruments, 3 in particular, to assist the small businesses. We had already started communicating the broad strokes of that last week, but today we're here to give the details. I'd also want to clarify the fake news that is going around that our support to small businesses has a requirement for 50% black ownership. We're supporting all small businesses in South Africa across the demographic spread of our population, though we'll make sure that there's geographic spread and demographic spread that is representative. I just wanted to make that clear. In terms of the business growth and resilient facility, it's a facility that we've created specifically to make sure that we respond to what Minister Patel and Minister Mkhize referred to, that they are going to import some of the supplies from outside the country, but there's a need to strengthen local supply for self-sufficiency. And in that space, we have created the facility to give local manufacturers and suppliers an opportunity to produce both for the medical and hygiene supplies that will be required to respond to the crisis, but also for the food security that will be required for the country to support the work which Minister Didiza was talking about, because when the farmers produce, some of them need to process and we must have them on the shelves. And that's what we are going to support. So, and the growth, the business growth and resilience facility, what it looks as, it will fund working capital, but it only be those that are directly linked to the direct cost of the business, and it will be based on the funding needs of the individual businesses. The term of the funding will be determined by the cash flow and the debt modeling techniques that our agency SIFA will utilize. We are also making that funding available at interest rate of prime less 5% to the SMMEs. And I want to reiterate the following. The President has indicated that during these trying times, there will be those opportunists who want to use the space to be corrupt and to limit the minimal resources that the country have to support SMMEs and the whole economy and the healthcare system. We are very clear that any misuse by both our officials and also the entrepreneurs who will be applying for the funding of this facility, we are going to make sure that we apply to the letter of the law the provisions that the President have indicated. But we are also going to institute a penalty for everybody who misused that facility, of that we are going to repay the facility at prime plus 10%. In terms of the qualifying criteria, we are saying the companies must be 100% owned by South African citizens, and they must employ at least 70% South African nationals. And we're going to give priority to businesses that are owned by women, youth, and people with disability. And of course, they must be SARS registered, SARS compliant. For the non-compliant SMMEs, there are applications, they can put them through, but they will only be considered when they're fully complied with SARS and other. If you have to comply with UIF, we'll have to help you with that. Our agency, SEDA, will be available to offer that assistance. We are also putting a requirement that you must register on our national database, which has gone live today, this morning, at 12 midnight exactly, the www.smmesa.gov.za. For the self-employed and the micro businesses who are not compliant, we are going to assist you to comply through the SEDA. The next facility that we are putting in place is the SMME Relief Finance Scheme, which we are going to avail it to assist SMMEs for the period of 6 months, commencing from the 1st of April 2020. In this facility, we are leaving out the self-employed and the hawkers, because we are creating, as the President has indicated, a special funding mechanism for the self-employed and the informal businesses as part of that safety net. And we are going to announce the details as we finalize the details with the relevant stakeholders. The intention is that was expressed by the President for both to retain jobs and to allow a minimum business continuity and economic continuity so that the ravages on the economy are not that severe. We are also going to be funding a working capital on this. We are also going to include, and the requirements must be auditable because these companies are already in existence. We are going to also include a prime rate of prime less 5% and also include a penalty of prime plus 10% in the event of an abuse. And we are saying, in terms of this facility, your needs will be done based on the business needs. You'll know that our SMME category is defined in terms of the schedule of our Gazette, which was published in March 2019, 15th of March 2019, that defines what is the SMME categories. We also have the same requirements in terms of ownership. They must be South African, and the employees must also be 70%. As you are aware, the banking sector has started to announce the mechanism to alleviate pressures on the SMMEs and self-employed and some level of vulnerable groups, including students. On our part, our agency SIFA is going to avail the following. We are introducing a payment moratorium or a payment holiday. That payment moratorium or holiday will be given to SIFA-funded SMMEs for a period of a maximum of 6 months to reduce the installment burden on loan obligations on clients during this period. And beyond the 6 months, we'll do a reevaluation of what are the arrangements we can put in place, as we are fully aware that even when the a disaster has ended, the kicking back of the economy may take a bit longer and SMMEs will remain vulnerable in that space. We are also including the deferments of capital or both capital and interest from the current loans that they have. And the interest that will be accrued during this period of 6 months, it will not be capitalized into the original loan facility over the proposed period. But it will require SMMEs to submit proof of the negative impact of the period of the COVID-19 disaster. And we'll be implementing using the CIFA post-investment team and the CEDA post-investment support to support the SMMEs in distress. In this space, we want to clearly indicate that those SMMEs who were already in distress before the disaster, we have facilities to assist you during our normal course of doing business. And as indicated by Minister Patel, our work will be continuing, albeit remotely, and also sometimes not in touch with, you won't be able to walk into our offices, but please apply in the normal channels for assistance through CIFA. We are also introducing a debt restructuring model for the SMMEs that will be affected. We are going to conduct an analysis of those CIFA-funded SMMEs to assess which clients require the restructuring of their loans. And this could take a form of extended loan term, interest reviewing, and additional funding, which may be required. And the facilities will vary per funded SMME depending on the SMME's cash flow that is before the disaster and the shutdown. And additional funding, if we have to put additional funding in the event we are going to restructure the debt, we are going to do that at a prime less 5% in terms of our arrangement. Like Minister Patel have indicated, that spaza shops are considered as part of the grocer stores that will provide facilities for people to access their food or to buy food from. We must indicate those spaza shops that will be open are strictly spaza shops that are owned by South Africans, managed and run by South Africans. We want to make sure that the quality of food and the assurance of the quality of products is there. We are going to support the spaza shops in terms of bulk buying. Will indicate the mechanisms we are putting in place to support those spaza shops. We are currently working with our municipalities to make sure that all those spaza shops that are licensed and those that are not licensed are brought to the fold, and will indicate how we work forward with them. We'll announce the further details later. For more information, you can follow us on our handle. But you can also have, if you have queries, you can contact us on our call center, 0860 663 7867, 0860 663 7867, or 0860 one stop. You can also reach us on info@dsbd.gov.za or info@mybindu.gov.za. You can also reach us on www.smmesa.gov.za. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, Minister Mantashe could not be with us here because he is making consultation with the mining sector and the petroleum sector. And indeed, after those consultations which are happening today, we will be able to also have him speaking to the nation and to you on what measures we're putting in the mining sector and also in the petroleum sector and energy sector. Thank you very much. We are now at a time when we can take questions. And again, you know that we are having another engagement at 2 o'clock. If we can ask necessary questions. Let's start there, and we come here. We go there, 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 we go there. And Lois, even if I don't see you, I've pointed at you. Or, and yourself, sir. In that order, and again, let's not start with preambles. Let's get to the business of the question. Thank you very much.
From UFM. The informal sector will also be affected by the lockdown. What are plans in place to minimize the impact in the sector?
Thank you very much. Next. Sharp and to the point.
Good afternoon or good morning. My name is Aserin Lovu from Capital Live. Again, informal sector assistance to SMMEs. I just want to understand, does informal sector entails those that are non-compliant or they were compliant, however, there is something that they still need to fix, but they can't fix due to the time frame that they have already now, so they can be taken as the informal ones. Thank you.
We are now that side.
Adele McKenzie from Now Media. This is directed at the Small Business Development Minister. I just want to understand if the same criteria in terms of the annual turnover and if it applies to all the relief funds apply to all sectors as well. And also how quickly could the funds be made available? I'm presuming there's going to be a fast-tracking process.
Thank
you.
you. Yes, Madam.
Minister Patel, CCTV China. It takes an enormous amount of effort and time to turn an economy around. You haven't had that time. Can you tell me, have you actually engaged in cooperation with other countries such as China, who's coming out of this virus? And can you tell us how, if you did have this cooperation, you actually, and in what examples you found it most useful? Thank you.
Next.
Okay, I'll go. Heidi Jockus from ENCA. Who do we report companies to who aren't abiding by the lockdown? Secondly, I don't know if anyone can answer this,
Can you repeat that one? I didn't hear it.
Who do we report to if companies are not abiding by the lockdown?
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then secondly, how are we going to ensure that we don't have load shedding? We're going to have millions of South Africans at home, and it's just going to exacerbate the situation if there is load shedding. And then just thirdly, the President has encouraged people to work remotely from home. But what if there is an instance where internet service providers have a breakdown or there's an issue with the internet? Are they going to be allowed to go and sort this out? Thank you.
Thank you.
Rorisang Khosana from The Citizen. I'd just like to know, South Africans are concerned or they're not sure what to do with their domestic workers and their nannies, specifically parents where both of them are working under the essential services listed and they don't know they're not sure whether to continue paying their domestic workers or nannies or incorporating them in the lockdown or letting them go home. And my second question is, what about employees that work on an hourly rate or on a no work, no pay basis? Is there a way that they could be assisted in paying rent and debit orders, or can they be exempt from such bills? Thank you.
Next. Yep.
Minister Mthembu, Puleli Treaty from ETV News. Maybe just two questions there. What happens in terms of funeral parlor businesses? Will they be allowed to operate, or is there going to be limited operations around their business sector? And also wedding and catering events as well, because a lot of South Africans are concerned about now the lockdown having been imposed from Thursday. What happens during the weekend if they have any organized event? That's one. Two, a lot of also South Africans have asked the questions in terms of areas and communities that do not have water, who rely on collecting water from JoJo tanks or going to the dam to get water to wash their clothes. What happens with them as well? Will there be limited movement around their area and communities? Thank you.
Crisalda Lewis from SABC Television News. Minister Patel, what happens to companies or retailers that would basically be putting profits before public safety? Surely these retailers have a responsibility also to ensure that the numbers that are going into the retailers are properly managed. There is that social distance. I know you said you're speaking to some of the major retailers about this, but what happens to companies if they don't comply?
Yes, Lord.
Karabole Tlatla, CNBC Africa. Two questions. Maybe to small business minister. The support that you're giving to companies, what happens to companies that are not 100% South African owned. So if a company is 47% South African owned, will it not qualify for assistance? And I particularly heard Minister Patel saying that the media is an important partner with regards to disseminating the message. I want to know if there will be a favorable look upon the media industry, which also suffered as a result of the no business that we're finding currently. Thank you.
Sir.
Angelo Coppola from China Global Television. Question for the DTIC Minister. I'd like to know whether the SANDF have been educated about Standing Order 156 and its interaction with the media after our incident yesterday. Secondly, a question for the SMME Minister. Minister, I'd like you to explain the logic behind stopping foreign-owned spaza shop owners from being open during this period. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Olani Mbanjwa, Newsroom Africa. One of the extraordinary measures that were announced by Minister Patel is for the exemption of the competition for the banking industry. How long is this going to last? Because there are concerns that there could be some collusion that develops as time goes on. And how are you going to monitor that there is no such collusion? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope I've taken all the hands. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Apologies, just a final question. Arabile Kumete here from the SABC. With regards to the measures that have been put forward, how much has National Treasury played a role in those is perhaps the one question. And two, just how much funding has National Treasury sort of put forward with regards to all of these to ensure that the planning sort of moves forward from this stage? Just my final one, I know it's probably very early, but has anybody actually thought about a plan B, if I can call it that, after the 3 weeks? What then happens, considering that the President did also say that this was just the initial phase of these plans? Thank you.
Maybe let's answer your last question. We have a team of people that is working on the situation every day and also making some prognosis of what might happen or not happen in 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time. So we are working on those models so that we are prepared, we have prepared ourselves for whatever that might happen after 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So yes, there is a net joint that is meeting every day, every morning, to look at where we are and what are the challenges and where will we be tomorrow. Similarly, where will we be in the next month or so? So there are a team of colleagues that are doing that type of work. Who would like to start, colleagues, answering the questions? Mr. Patel?
Okay, well, thank you very much, colleague. Just run briefly through the ones specifically directed at me. I start with the CCTV question on whether we've learned anything from the experience of other countries. Yes, we have, and we've shared and heard from other leaders, global leaders, as well as from embassies on their experience. For example, the decision to do the lockdown quickly is based on the learnings that countries that have delayed this have not been able to slow the spread of the virus. And not only is that a critical public health measure, but it's also a smart economic measure. Because when we lose lives and when we damage our people, we pay an enormous economic price. Second, the importance of working from home, facilitating arrangements where people can work from home has been done increasingly over the last 2 weeks in different parts of the world, and we're now implementing those measures. Thirdly, fiscal and other measures to support vulnerable parts of society, small businesses. My colleague has spoken very extensively on small businesses, firms that are vulnerable, making special facilities available as announced by the President. That has also been informed by the learnings of other countries. We've looked carefully at the lockdown provisions to see the kind of sectors that countries have deemed as critical. We've looked at our own reality as South Africa, what is key to maintaining basic supplies to our people. So those have been the kind of areas of learnings. On the ENCA question, when the Gazette comes out, it will provide more information on the reporting arrangements. On load shedding, of course, we will work to ensure that the entire energy supply chain from coal mines through to the coal trucks, through to the arrangements at the various Eskom plants, that is generation, the transmission, the distribution and reticulation, all of those would be exempted from the lockdown. In addition to that, we expect that there will be a decreased demand for electricity when some of the larger enterprises begin their shutdown. And of course, we will need to work closely together to make sure that all the key maintenance teams from Eskom are able to respond immediately to challenges. Similarly, on the digital infrastructure, we regard that as an absolutely critical service. So we will make sure that both the fixed lines and the mobile telephony systems are maintained, that workers and professionals connected with any of those would be exempted from the lockdown, because those are critical means of communication, but also of economic activity that can be done from home. Coming to the question on the ETV issue around funeral parlor businesses, is a very specific question, but of course we will make sure that basic undertaking services and facilities are available in this period. We'll still have to look at some of the more detailed questions that have come up on some of the other areas. On the SABC question on retailers who put profit before public safety, we've made a call to the retail sector and we've had a very positive response. We'll monitor carefully the developments over the next few days and the next few weeks. Our first request and our first line of approach is partnership, working with our people, working with businesses. It's in all of our interests. We're not doing something for government. We're doing it as government in order to ensure that we save lives, that we limit the damage on the economy, that we maintain supply lines for consumers through the retail sector. So at this stage, while the law provides for very, very significant powers for government, at this stage we think collaboration, cooperation, partnerships are what we're going to be emphasizing and working on. On the social distance, again, every retailer, many of them have been caught by the numbers of people coming into their stores. So we're learning as we're doing, and we're adjusting. We've asked now the different retailers to share best practice among themselves so that whatever works in one place, we quickly share in other retail spaces. On the question that CNBC asked on the economic issues around the media, if ever there was a question that I should lightheartedly say there's a clear conflict of interest, it would be that question. But I think what we've done is we've looked more seriously at all businesses that are directly affected by the virus and the slowdown in the economy. On the question that's been raised of the SANDF, I think it's a learning experience for everybody, working together, making sure that the protocols are rolled out, that where there are some gaps, we fix those. We're in something that societies don't prepare for. This is not even once a generation event. This is an event that is unprecedented. And therefore, much of what we will need to do, particularly the speed with which we move. Societies had many crises in the past, but the speed with which we need to move is unusual. And so we're going to appeal right across our society for tolerance and for just working with each other as we hit a problem. And will there be times when we, even as government, when a ball is dropped? Absolutely. But it's going to be to pick them up quickly, deal with the problems, and to get a positive approach. We're going to have to care for each other in this period. And a critical part of it is just tolerance. And of course, in stresses, tempers flare. And our job is now, all of us together, to see how we can ensure that we remain, that generosity of spirit is there to see us all through this period. On the Newsroom Africa question on the exemptions to the banks, it will be for the period of the crisis when the national disaster is no longer in place, then the exemptions will also lapse. We have put in place provisions in all of these exemptions to deal with challenges, so they specify precisely what the collaboration and agreement can be on. It cannot go beyond those areas without a further directive. We've also spelled out in there that minutes have to be retained of meetings and copies of agreements have to be retained as records by the companies concerned. We want to take the view that we will remain vigilant to ensure that the laws are not broken, but at the same time we are introducing flexibility, because flexibility is absolutely critical to enable the sharing of resources. Normal competitive behavior will be suspended for certain kinds of activity that are directly related to ensuring that we deal quickly and effectively with the virus. On the role of Treasury, the Director General of Treasury is here. It's been an absolutely key partner, working very closely with different departments. We've had an extraordinary level of cooperation and working together right across, not only in government, but between government and the private sector, between government and the trade union movement. We're seeing South Africans coming together to take responsibility together in partnership to deal with this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Kuban.
There were no questions directed to me. I think the questions will be others for social cluster in the afternoon.
Mr. Chris. Mr. Chavin.
Thank you. On the issue of the informal sector, I've indicated that we are working a detailed plan on how to support the informal sector and the self-employed, and we'll announce them in due course. I'd indicated when I was speaking. The non-compliant SMMEs do not qualify as informal sector. The non-compliant SMMEs, we have put a system in place to support them to comply in terms of our CEDA support program to SMMEs. And how quickly it will respond, we know we're not going to be perfect, but we currently chasing a 14 days turnaround time, and we are going to rely on the feedback that we get in terms of the improvement and all, how to get to that 14 days turnaround time. In terms of the non-South African owned companies, we're hoping that the other companies can source funding somewhere else. In terms of our funding criteria, we are required to fund South African owned companies, at least majority owned South Africans. On the sponsor shops, what informed that, but it's not final, like we said, we're going to finalize the discussion, not the discussion, our approach on the sponsor shops equally. Our issue is that we have to support them to source goods and services, and within the parameter of what we're able to do, we'll source them. We're currently looking at those who are licensed by municipalities, how do we support them, and what is the capacity we'll put in place. So the issue of foreign-owned sponsor shops, if they are licensed and the municipalities have the system to support them, which can fit into our system, we'll consider them, but we'll indicate that as we release the details later. Thank you.
Minister Nwasi.
I just want to emphasize that regardless of the hours of work an employee may do, if the employer is compliant, we will have to cover that worker in terms of the UIF. However, and we've debated this matter with Labour, we'll have to deal with those issues case by case. We can't just punish the workers because of rogue employers. This is a matter which we are talking about, because some of them do deduct the monies but do not pay. So that is very, very important. Further, Minister Mtembu, let me just say this. We are talking about 4 types of benefits. There are normal benefits like temporal employer-employee relief scheme. There are also death benefits, there's illness benefit. Those are covered. They've already been there. But there is a very special benefit, which we call it the disaster benefit. And that is what we'll be explaining after we have consensus with all the NetLab partners. Thank you.
Thank you. DG, Treasury.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, we have also went above the questions that we received today online. Some of the colleagues who are not here also posed some questions, and I'll also be responding to those. Firstly, we are watching the performance of the economy very closely, including sectors that experience the highest impact. We stand ready as Treasury, working in the collective of government to support where needed, as ministers have indicated, the interventions in tourism, the interventions in small business development, and the interventions in agriculture. We have eased the procurement process to access goods and equipment easily and quickly. It is only goods that all obviously are related to fighting COVID-19 as per the regulations that we've issued. Later today in our website, we will issue guidelines to be followed in accessing the support that was announced by the President yesterday. All regulators, the Reserve Bank, Provincial Authority, the FSCA, SARS, will continue to function as usual. They will not close. NT and SARS will publish later today details on the workings of each tax proposal that was presented yesterday. The Reserve Bank and FSCA and ourselves will issue more details on how the financial system will function. Regulators will also issue guidelines on categories of workers at banks, insurance payments, insurance companies, payments, Johannesburg Stock Exchange will be regarded also as essential staff. People running IT platforms in banks and ATMs, machines, electronic banking, payment systems, JSE, strained platforms will also be listed as essential staff, and business will continue there as usual. In terms of the current, the questions that have been asked online, one question was, how will all the COVID plans affect the budget and budget processes? Will you have to retable the budget in Parliament to deal with the additional COVID crisis, spending pressure on simply wait till the MTBPS? We will explore amending the appropriation bill, but in the meantime, we'll allow violence where possible. This can be considered for the initial response to the coronavirus, insofar as reprioritizing towards the front-line sectors is concerned. But that said, Treasury is still assessing the macroeconomic impact of the pandemic and the recent escalation of measures to deal with the COVID-19 outbreak, in addition to other factors such as the oil production dispute between OPEC and Russia and idiosyncratic domestic factors such as load shedding. This will ultimately inform any decision on the fiscal framework, and all things equal, we can still use the MTBPS to retable the budgets and the new fiscal framework. Currently, we'll have to use all what's possible in terms of reprioritization process to ensure that we address the current challenges. Second question, how concerned are you about government's ability to fund itself in the turmoil, particularly given the pressure we have already seen in the government bond market? For now, National Treasury is working within its means, and depending on the impact of the virus, different options will be considered. Government is working to limit the fiscal deficit through reprioritization, spending adjustments, and postponement of certain initiatives. Budget 2020 was a clear statement of government's intent in this regard. Beyond this, additional action is needed to raise medium to long-run economic growth. The Treasury has provided a clear strategy in this regard. It is thus important to note that fiscal policy alone cannot address the increasing pressures South Africa faces. Nevertheless, the Treasury will continue working on proposals on how to deal with funding pressures created by the current crisis. The final question, how do you think a possible Moody's downgrade on Friday will impact us in this midst of the crisis? We cannot comment on this at the moment. A media statement normally is issued after the rating agents have rating agents have indicated their actions, and this is normally issued after the announcement. And at the right appropriate time, after we know what Moody's has decided, we'll then be in a position to issue a statement in that regard. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, colleagues. There might be some questions that we have not answered because they belong to another cluster. We have an interaction coming with the social cluster at 2 o'clock. But as we have also indicated, tomorrow morning at 10, we'll have an interaction as government with the media, with the cluster on JCPS, our police, our defense, our home affairs. So all those ministers will be at hand tomorrow at 10. Of course, we will not be meeting here tomorrow. We'll be meeting at the GCIS. So those who don't know where GCIS is, just get in touch with me after this meeting. That's where we'll be meeting tomorrow. But having said that, our next meeting is scheduled for 2 o'clock this afternoon. So you can, with the social cluster ministers, so that they also tell the nation what plans have they put in place to implement the measures that the President has announced to the nation last night. Thank you, and thank you very much. That concludes this media briefing. Thank you very much.
Break. All right, that concludes the briefing by those ministers for now. We're going to go for a quick break and have more news for you afterwards.
Well, look, it certainly does tell you the lay of the land, right? Things are difficult. There's so many minute issues that also need to be ironed out, need to be sorted. Economically, the question, though, is where will the money come from? If South Africa continues to have had such a tight budget to try and fill in all these fiscal measures before COVID-19, what happens in a time like this as well, then, where we need to find a solution? I'm joined then by the Director General of National Treasury, that's Dondo Mokgajane, who joins us here. Dondo, thank you so much for the time. Let's talk about where the money will come from in a situation like this.
Look, the money is there. The money is in the budget. The money is in the system. It's through reprioritization. You heard the Minister of Tourism saying that they'll make 200 million available. This is from existing monies and resources where we are approving environments from other programs to specific COVID-19 related programs. And that's working. Same with the 150 million rand that Minister Patel was talking about of seed funding for the Solidarity Fund. He did indicate that we'll be putting 100 million from Treasury. Effectively, it's again looking at budgets, slicing off some budgets that are clearly not going to be spent. I can tell you now as an example, if you look at what's going to happen on the travel budgets across the departments, in national departments we have about on average on a monthly basis spend about 280 million. That 280 million won't be spent for domestic and international travel. So effectively that means that money will have to be reprioritized. So that 100 million, for instance, is coming from such programs. And as he said, the 50 million is coming from the lottery. So there is money in the system currently that's not going to be, and we are reprioritizing to specific COVID-19 programs.
Some might say, however, that there aren't specific fiscal measures that are put in place. And that will be my question number one with this one. But linked to that, you had said over here that, fiscal measures alone cannot solve the situation. The Reserve Bank goes on to say monetary policy alone cannot solve the situation. Who is going to help us solve it then?
No, look, this is hands on deck for everybody. I mean, I'm saying that because if you look at, for instance, the Solidarity Fund, and already we've got what, 2 billion, 115 there already. I think one option is that let's all South Africans contribute there and find ways of actually making this kitty bigger, because it's obviously going to help in terms of alleviating the impact. Secondly, yes, we said fiscal policy and monetary policy only cannot. A combination of interventions is necessary. We may not have come out very clear in terms of fiscal measures. But look, it's not, don't underestimate what you indicated. The tax break as a result of the employment tax incentive provisions, that's enough. It's actually a lot to actually make sure that small business in particular can ease the impact of this. Secondly, I think payment deferrals. It's not also a small thing, whereby we're easing the pressure currently, because at some point will kick in. Some newspaper was saying today that the bazooka has not been used as yet. Yes, you didn't hear me mentioning anything about what's in the contingency reserve. Sure. You didn't hear me mentioning anything about any other measures of monies that we can access, as Minister said yesterday, including money that we can access from the multilateral development banks. The World Bank, for instance, have said there's $50 million available now.
So are you considering the World Bank and the like?
They are there. They are there. These are options that are there. The NDB, for instance, there's a $1 billion amount that we could access. All we're saying is that the impact is not yet known of the COVID-19. We are assessing it very closely. As I said, we are closely watching the performance of the economy. If need be, but obviously that will come with further breaking the expenditure ceilings that are there. These should be monies that, when need be, will access. But currently we are considering, obviously we know the access, we know the conditions and the processes. We want to be ready in case you are going to need that. But currently we are not. Currently we are saying there's money in the system, and we can reprioritize and focus into these interventions that are critical.
Yeah. What is perhaps your limit, if I can call it that, as National Treasury, in terms of the funding that may be needed? Would you say 100 billion is a figure that you're perhaps hoping you don't have to surpass at some stage?
Look, currently it's not about the figures. As I said, the impact is very early days to talk about whether the target is 100 billion rands or not. I wouldn't want to venture into that because we have not as yet assessed the full impact of COVID-19. All I can say is that currently for interventions that are critical, for instance, we have eased procurement regulations in order for people to access quickly and speedily what's needed. And as this goes on, as we understand fully the impact, and the epidemiological projections are made and the modeling is made, we'll then have an idea as to what kind of impact are we talking about. And in that way, we'll obviously look at further fiscal measures that we could put on the table for consideration by government to employ.
Very quickly as well, would you say that perhaps the budget 2020 that was announced last month may need to be thrown out the window in some aspects because of how difficult this scenario is and where spending might go?
Look, that's the reality here. The fiscal framework is obviously we have to relook at the fiscal framework. And as I said, if you had me earlier on, I said it's important that currently we use violent processes and procedures that are provided for as per the Public Finance Management Act. And if need be, the fiscal framework, which unfortunately we can only table at the MTBPS, including new growth numbers, there's anything between -2% and -2.7% that many analysts out there are saying the impact is going to be. But however, for now, we will obviously have to reconsider the framework as it is currently and only announce the new framework around the MTBPS.
You did say that the growth figure you can only talk about, of course, primarily at the MTBPS, but would you assess that that would go into negative?
Look, it's early days, but look, depending on the impact, one can say we could go there. But look, at the same time, Arabile, it's important that we also consider, let's not forget, in the midst of all of the challenges around COVID-19, let's not forget the structural measures that we need to implement and also do at the same time. So it's important so that we are able to ease the pressure that comes as a result of COVID-19.
Dondo, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. We'll exercise some social distancing and I won't shake your hand in this one. But thank you so much for the time. Really, really appreciate it there. The Director General of National Treasury, Dondo Mokgajane, really offering perhaps some sentiment, some thought around just what needs to be done at a time like this. Can National Treasury afford it? Perhaps not. How much money is there in the kitty? Not necessarily saying just how much, but really emphasizing just how critical it will be to find the exact economic impact. Growth might certainly go into negative territory, and that tells you just how difficult it is. Nompu, yesterday as the president was speaking, we of course made note of just the words he was putting out there, and one of the key elements here is how we should not panic. And hopefully we could just bring up one of the graphs. Really, a lot of this really comes from what the government, the president was speaking about yesterday. The likes of the supermarkets will continue to be open. Banks and essential services like that will continue to be open. There is no need then for South Africans to think that they need to panic buy in any item and at any time really in future. So it really is telling that South Africans need to focus on perhaps doing what is necessary in an economy like our very own. Very quickly as well, what is the economic response? You may feel like there may not have necessarily been a fiscal measure put in place, but as I spoke to Dondo Mokgajane here, he did make note that South Africa's economic response is really the measures that have been put forward there. You do have the fund, of course, coming online. Around 2 billion being offered by South Africa's richest families there as well, the Rupert and Oppenheimer families, really offering 2 billion in total as well. The 150 that goes into the fund as well as a seed contribution to begin with from government. And as you can see there, the total around 13.85 billion does tell you that that is just a starting point. The president even yesterday did say that it is only a plan A or a part A of the entire scenario. The other measures as well, of course, last week we saw that 100 basis point cut. Nompo, it certainly gets very, very interesting as one continues to look into just the impact of COVID-19 across not just South Africa's economy, but certainly the globe.
Thanks very much, Arabile, for that. And we'll speak to you, no doubt, further later in the day. My colleague there, Arabile Kumede. Health Minister is really